Election pledges, yet this morning they say they'll take family homes out of inheritance tax by introducing a new allowance, effectively increasing the threshold for paying the tax to £1 million. But what message does this send to people on low incomes, the people who the Tories are trying to attract? Well, I'm joined now by the Conservative Transport Secretary, Patrick McLoughlin. Very good morning to you, Mr McLoughlin. Well, that very question to you. And is this another tax cut for millionaires?
No, it's a balanced approach. We have taken the basic tax take so that people earning below £10,000 pay no tax whatsoever. What we are seeing is a number of more people being drawn in to being paid inheritance tax. People who would never imagine that they would be drawn into paying inheritance tax. And if we don't take any action on this, that figure would rise to 11% by 2019. So it is right that we take a modest approach so that people can pass on.
Modest? I mean, if you include the family home, I mean, that's £1 million.
People can pass on their family home, something that they've grown up in, and all of a sudden they find they have to lose it, up to £1 million, because house prices are rising. And so, therefore, it always used to be paid. Inheritance tax was designed to be paid by the very, very wealthy. It still will be paid by the very, very wealthy. But those people who have seen the house price rise...
It's £1 million worth of assets, not wealthy.
Well, if you've seen a house rise in price over a period of time, and you hadn't wanted to force your parents out of their homes so that you can raise the money earlier on, because that would have been another alternative that you could have done, then I think this is being fair. It is being fair to those people. It will take the kind of tax that we take on inheritance. If you look at the projections by the OBR, around to 6% of those people that would still pay inheritance tax, and therefore it is keeping it at level pegging. Otherwise, the figure would rise substantially.
People are going to say that we heard this all before 2010, a long-held ambition, the Chancellor tells us, and he originally announced something like this in, 2007, didn't he, despite Gordon Brown's guns. I mean, will it actually happen if you have to get involved in any coalition negotiations? This went out the window when you had to get in bed with the Lib Dems, didn't it?
You're quite right that it was announced in 2007, and then Gordon Brown then allowed a double take a cross, so that it raised it as a result of...
What about the 2010 manifesto?
Well, the simple fact is, this is what's going to be in our manifesto. I very much hope that we form a majority government. That's what we're going out to do.
But beyond that, if you don't, does this happen?
We need to take 23 seats to win a majority government. We're going out to get a majority government. And we can talk about the machinations of what then happens as far as discussions after that, when we know the results.
But it's all about red lines within the manifesto now, because people know what happened with the Lib Dems, some of their promises, some of your promises. They had to go. You have to compromise. But are there those issues, those promises that are across that red line, we will not compromise on that, or is this one of those that might go again?
This is in our manifesto. We're going out to get a Conservative majority. We need to win 23 seats to do that. We are the only party with the polls the way they are, particularly in Scotland, that can do that. And that's what we are putting out to the British public, and I'm confident that we're going to get that majority.
Let's return to the issue of whose side you're on. Labour saying today there's £7.5 billion of savings to be made there on tax evaders and avoiders that you've left go begging with your friends in the hedge funds.
Well, I'm staggered that Ed Balls was a person that was defending some of these things when he was a minister in the Treasury. He was defending some of these tax things that he's now going to tighten up on. It was a Conservative proposal to bring the first charge into non-doms. We had Ed Balls himself earlier this week being caught on an interview saying, actually, if you did what we propose on non-doms, it could actually take money out of the country. That's not very good for us to improve our services. So I think if anyone is confused in what they're saying in this campaign, it's the Labour Party and not the Conservative Party.
So let's take this promise on inheritance tax with what was said about the NHS and the £8 billion you seem to have miraculously found for that. You said that last week. Can we read into this, after a relatively sober budget, no giveaways there from George Osborne, the Conservative campaign team is beginning to panic and starting throwing the sweeties around?
No, we're not beginning to panic at all. Simon Stevens came out with these plans
he came out with it at the end of last year.
Indeed, and who appointed Simon Stevens to that job?
Well, who didn't listen to him?
Well, we did listen to him, because we've actually increased, if you look at the amount of money we've increased spending on the health service over the last 5 years, we've increased it overall by £12.5 billion, of which £7 billion is actual growth. So So we've done it. So what I'd say is judge us on our record. We've actually reduced the deficit. We've cut the deficit in half.
Well, you're in the midst
We've
of, well,
increased.
the record is you're in the midst of an election campaign in which several polls came out saying that your attacks on Ed Miliband weren't working and that Labour were creeping in one of the polls into a 6-point lead. And then, lo and behold, we get an extra £8 billion for one of your weak flanks, the National Health Service.
You tend to believe too much in opinion polls. There's only one poll I'm concerned about, and that's a poll that's going to be 3 weeks on Thursday.
Don't come that one, Mr McLoughlin. We know how much the Conservative Party spend on polling, internal polling. All the parties do.
I'm telling you what I'm saying is that the poll that matters is the one 3 weeks on Thursday. We have set out our proposals as far as the health service. It was always clear that we were going to want to, having appointed Simon Stevens, to abide by his plan. And we did in the last Parliament. In the last Parliament, we've increased health spending every year, and overall it's £7 billion higher than it would have needed to have been just to have done the inflation increases.
Let me read you a quotation in one of the papers today from one of your former MPs, they're now candidates, of course, now saying we're not in the panic room yet, we are in the waiting room to the panic room. You will accept the matter I alluded to earlier, that your colleague Michael Fallon's attack on Ed Miliband didn't really work, did it? Saying just because he stabbed his brother in the back, stood against his brother, that he can't be trusted on defence.
Well, I think what Michael Fallon was saying there was absolutely right. If Ed Miliband has to rely on the SNP to form a government, which could be possible on what's being talked about at the moment, if that was the case, then I think Michael was absolutely right to say we could find ourselves in the trouble we might, as far as the decision on Trident is concerned.
But it is a matter of character then. You can't trust Ed Miliband because he stood against his brother, even though he took a different approach. It could have been anyone.
Well, we are making our case in a very positive way overall on the issues that we're fighting this next general election on.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying, instead we suddenly hear, instead of attacks on Ed Miliband, making it a matter of character after he also, in those polls you ignore, he also went up in terms of his personal ratings, that suddenly we're getting some pretty unfunded giveaways.
I don't think we're giving any unfunded giveaways. What we're saying is, look at the record that we did. We inherited a record deficit for this country. We've cut the deficit in half. We've seen employment rise in this country. We were told that unemployment would go up. It has come down. So we've managed to find extra resources for the health service. The health service is incredibly important to us. Anybody who hears the Prime Minister talk on the health service will know how passionate he is personally about the health service. So judge us on what we've done. Unemployment down, deficit down, tax rates lifted up for everyone. So now nobody earning under £10,600 a year is paying tax at all. Okay. That is very positive.
Let's talk about your brief. HS2, Red Lines Manifesto. HS2, that's going to happen, is it, in spite of the fact that it might cost you a few seats?
Well, HS2 is something which is very necessary for the overall long-term capacity of the infrastructure of our country. We have not invested sufficiently in infrastructure in our country. The West Coast Main Line is one of the busiest railway lines anywhere in Europe. Unless we take the long-term plans to actually invest in infrastructure, this country will not be able to compete. Our great cities in Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds and Sheffield will not have the opportunities that London has had. At the moment we're building Crossrail in London, £15 billion, a big investment made at the start of this government, because it's necessary to improve our overall infrastructure.
And just in terms of the overall campaign, voters may be a little bit confused about what they're hearing. We've got, this was leaked during the week, wasn't it? The notes for speakers from the Conservative Research Department. It's interesting hearing what you've just said to me, Mr McLoughlin, about, Conservatives believe in a simpler and fairer tax system, hard-working taxpayers keeping more of their money, that Ed Miliband would result in chaos by cobbling together a deal with the SNP. That's straight from this document. You're not really saying it as it is. You're reading from the lexicon.
Well, I haven't got the lexicon in front of me, and I'm certainly saying it as I see it and as my constituents see it. And when I go around campaigning in the country, that's exactly the kind of things they're saying.
Do you not think, though, it's a bit off-putting for the voters? They kind of know what they're going to hear. I know it's about reinforcing the message, but people aren't fools, are they? They just keep hearing the same mantra all the time.
Well, there is a message to get across during the general election campaign. I make no apology for doing that. I make no apology for actually saying why I think it's absolutely essential that we get a Conservative government in 3 weeks' time, because I think that is right for the United Kingdom. I'm very proud of the record that the government's got over the last 5 years in government.
Secretary of State, thank you very much, Steve. Very good to see you. Patrick McLoughlin there. Now, coming up on Moynihan, as Hillary Clinton prepares to announce that she'll run for president, I'm going to be speaking to former White House advisor Pippa Malmgren and the former British ambassador to Washington, Sir